Second part of 2.7. The other day we talked about graphing by hand, using the calculator to graph, use the tables to find the solutions. Now solving them algebraically. I have x squared minus 10x plus 18 is less than or equal to negative 3. Let's just think of this if this was an equal sign here. If this said equals negative 3, what would you do to solve? What would we do first to solve?
Take away 18.
Not take away, not subtract 3, add the 3. So I'm going to add the 3 over. X squared minus 10x. If I add 3 over, I get 21. Now it's equal to 0. Now solving this, we have 3 different methods. Factoring, complete the square, or quadratic formula. I don't see an A, so now I start thinking I might be able to factor. Is there a way to multiply to get a 21, but you add to get a 10? 7 and 3. So I have x minus 7, x minus 3. Why did I use minuses? Sign in the middle, negative. So I have, what are my zeros? What are my solutions? 7 and 3. Nothing's changed. This is where I'm going to look. I see this right here. When we did the graphing parts, when it was less than, what did it end up being? An and or an or statement. When we graphed, we had something like this. You had this line. When it was below this line, it was this part, right? So it was an and statement. When you have less than, it means and. And statements, we have less than or equal to x, less than or equal to. We write them as compound statements. So it has to be in between what two numbers? It has to be in between 3 and 7.
You want us to write a smaller number first?
Always put the smaller number first. Because if you think on a number line, which one's coming first? The smaller number, then the larger number. All right, what would be your first step? Move the 2 over. So I have x squared minus 6x plus 8. Now I'm just going to write equals 0. I'm going to try to factor this one. 2 numbers that multiply to get me 8, but add get me 6. So it's x minus 4, x minus 2, which means I have zeros of 4 and 2. Now this is where I look. It's greater than, so it's automatically or. X is less than or equal to something, or x is greater than or equal to something. You're going to have x is less than or x is greater than. Now, if you think about this, it has to be less than the 2, greater than 4. It has to be less than the small number. Because if you think on a number line, here's the 2, here's the 4. It has to go this way, and it has to go this way to be an or. If it went the other way, they'd overlap, and it'd be all real numbers because they overlap. Try this one now. Now I have negative 2x squared plus 3x plus 7 less than 2. Coming around, I see that most of you negative 2x squared plus 3x subtracted over the 2 and got 5. Now from here, there's different ways to do it. You could try to factor, could have solved the completing the square, or the quadratic formula. Me personally, I see an A, I don't try to factor. Completing the square, I can't divide everything by negative 2 evenly. Not going to complete the square. Quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times A. -3 plus or minus square root of something over -4. 3 squared, 9. Negative negative makes a positive. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. 40 plus 9 is 49. The square root of 49 is 7. -3 plus or minus 7 all over -4. Now I have to do the plus minus. So I have -3 plus 7 is 4. 4 over -4, -1. Got to do the minus part. -3 and -7's -10 over -4 is 5/2. Coming around, most people I saw the zeros correct. If there was a mistake, it was usually the signs. Now, I've told you so far, if it's less than, it's an and statement. Let's look in the calculator. I'm going to show you something. -2 x squared plus 3x plus 7 2. If I look in the table, I want to find out that it's less than 2. And here you would think it's an and statement in between the -1 and the 5/2. So -1 and the 5/2 happens in here. Am I less than 2 in here? Am I less than 2? 7's greater than 2, 8's greater than 2, 5's greater than 2. It's the opposite of what we thought. Instead of being an and statement, it's becoming an or. There's a reason why this has happened. The negative in front of the A, that's correct. The negative in front of the A messes things up. If you have a negative A, this means the opposite. So instead of less than, it would mean greater than. So instead of an and, this is an or. X is less than the small one, or X is greater than the large one. The small one's -1, the large one's 5/2. If this was greater than and it had a negative, it would become a less than. When you have a negative A, the and becomes an or, the or becomes an and. Now, because I got -1 and 5/2 as answers, that means I could have factored originally. Now, word problem. The monthly profit P of a small business that sells bicycle helmets can be modeled by the function -8x squared plus 600x minus 4200. X is the average selling price of a helmet. What range of a selling price will generate a monthly profit of at least $6,000? The hardest part of this is taking the words and changing it into an actual inequality. They give you the function. -8x squared plus 600x minus 4200. What's our inequality symbol going to be? Is it going to be less than, or is it going to be greater than? Why greater than? Why is it less than? All right, what range of selling price will generate a monthly profit of at least? If I said you had at least $5, are you going to have more than or less than? You're going to have more than. And at least means you could have that number. So it's greater than or equal to how much money? 6,000. That's the hardest part. No, we didn't talk. The only time you start caring about that negative a is when you actually go to find out is it and or. What's your first step? Subtract 6,000 over. Negative 8x squared plus 600x. If I subtract 6,000 over, I get negative 10,200. I'm dealing with large numbers here. I'm definitely not going to factor. Completing the square, this negative 8, I don't want to try to figure that out. I'm going to go right to quadratic. Negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. I'm going to let the calculator help me out. Negative 600 plus or minus the square root of something over negative 16. 600 squared minus 4 times by a times by c. We get 33,600. Now, do we understand the fact that we have to do a plus and we have to do a minus? So I'm going to put this in the calculator. Got to put the top in parentheses. Negative 600 plus the square root of 33,600. Get out of the bracket or out of the square root. Close the parenthesis. Divided by negative 16. So I have 1 0 of 26.04. Second enter. Change that plus to a minus. Second answer is 48.96. Now this is where I go after I found the zeros. Go back up here. A lot of you pointed out initially negative a there is going to change this. This normally would be an or statement, but because of this, it becomes a and statement. So and statements are written. Less or x less than, x less than. These ones were equal to. The small numbers 2604, the high numbers 48.96. So for them to make $6,000 profit, or at least $6,000 profit, they have to sell it in between $26.04 and $48.96. So yes, that is where you get $6,000. If you sold it for $60, does not mean you're going to make more money. Because once you've started to sell things for too high of a price, less people buy it. There's a target price that people will pay for things. Once you start getting too high of a price, less people buy it and you actually make less money. If it's too cheap, more people are buying it, but you're actually making less money because you're losing money on it. Any questions?